It's a legacy. It will never be forgotten. It's ingrained in people's hearts and experiences.
Today, we need to talk about a story that almost nobody in the national media is connecting to the bigger picture. And trust me, they should be. Because what happened on a Sunday afternoon on Stoneway North in Seattle, Washington tells you everything about where this city is headed. Picture this. It's a cold February morning in the Wallingford neighborhood of Seattle. You push open the door of a place you've been coming to for 30 years. The smell hits you first. Coffee, bacon grease, something baking from scratch. The booths are full. The regulars know each other by name. The waitstaff have been here for years. Somebody's kid is doing homework in the corner. This is not a trendy spot. There's no avocado toast on the menu, no QR code, no Instagram aesthetic. This is the real thing, a working-class diner that served oversized omelets and battered French fries and Bloody Marys to the same neighborhood for half a century. On February 1st, 2026, Wendy Morales locked the door of the Blue Star Cafe and Pub for the last time. After 50 years, after 2 generations of family ownership, after decades of surviving recessions, a pandemic, and everything in between, the Blue Star Cafe was gone.
It wasn't a job. It was definitely, like I said, I was obsessed with what the Blue Star was and what my dad created.
And here is what the media mostly missed. This was not a random closure. This was not just a lease issue. This was not just one restaurant. The Blue Star closing is a window into something much larger. Something that is eating Seattle from the inside out. And the people running this city either don't see it or they don't care. So before we get into it, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because this one goes deep. Let's get into it. Let's start with what actually happened, because the details matter. The Blue Star Cafe and Pub opened in Wallingford in 1996. But the story starts earlier than that. In 1975, a man named Leon Torrey opened a restaurant called Etc. in Seattle's Madison Park neighborhood. That was the seed. 21 years later, the family established the Blue Star in Wallingford, and it became a neighborhood institution. Not famous in the way that gets written up in national food magazines, famous in the way that matters more. The kind of place where generations of the same family show up for Sunday brunch. The kind of place where someone who moved to Seattle 15 years ago still calls their first hometown spot. When Leon Torrey retired in 2009, his daughter Wendy Morales took it over. She didn't take it over for the money. And then in January 2026, she posted the announcement. Now, you might hear that and think this happens to restaurants all the time. And you would be right. Restaurants are hard, always have been. But here is why this story is bigger than it looks. The Blue Star was not a struggling startup. It was not a pandemic experiment that never found its footing. It was a 50-year-old institution in one of Seattle's most established residential neighborhoods. It survived the dot-com bust. It survived 2008. It survived COVID. What it could not survive was the cumulative weight of a city that has been making it harder and harder to run a small business every single year. And here is the number that should stop you cold. A survey conducted this past winter asked 136 independent small businesses in Seattle, cafes, restaurants, boutiques, salons, how they were doing compared to COVID. 67% of them said they were under more financial stress right now than they were during the worst public health crisis in a century. 2/3 more stress than COVID. Let that sink in. Now here's where the story gets complicated, because the squeeze that Wendy Morales described is not an accident. It is not bad luck. It is the predictable result of a policy environment that has been stacking costs onto small businesses for years, one layer at a time, with no serious acknowledgement of what the math eventually does to the businesses at the bottom of the pile. Follow the money. Seattle raised its minimum wage to $20.76 per hour, effective January 1st, 2025. That is the highest local minimum wage of any major American city. For a diner running tight margins on $22 omelets, that is not a rounding error. That is a structural problem. When your labor cost jumps close to 20% in a single year, you have 3 options: raise prices, cut staff, or close. And the Blue Star was already operating at the edge of what its clientele could absorb. That is the owner of a 50-year diner telling you that her customers cannot afford to keep coming, because Seattle has made it too expensive to live there, which means it is too expensive to eat there. which means it is too expensive to run a restaurant there, and the costs kept coming. In November 2025, Seattle voters passed Proposition 2, a B&O tax increase for city businesses effective January 1st, 2026. That is a gross receipts tax on the privilege of doing business in Seattle. Manufacturing, retail, and wholesale tax rates went up from 0.222% to 0.342%. That stacks on top of the state-level business and occupation tax. It stacks on top of the Jumpstart payroll tax that went into effect in 2021, which charges businesses up to 2.4% on every employee earning more than $150,000 a year. And in March 2026, the Washington State Legislature passed the Millionaire's Tax, a 9.9% income tax on household income above $1 million per year. Washington had rejected an income tax 10 separate times since 1934. That streak ended. Tax Foundation analysts ran the numbers after that bill passed. Their finding was direct. Under the new law, Seattle now has the highest combined top marginal rate on wage income in the entire country, higher than California, higher than New York, the highest in the nation. That is not ideology, that is arithmetic. And what did Seattle's mayor say while all of this was happening? That is the part that should stop you cold. On April 14th, 2026, Mayor Katie Wilson appeared at a forum at Seattle University. She had won the mayor's race in November 2025 by less than 0.75%, the narrowest margin in more than a century. And at that forum, someone asked her whether she was worried about millionaires leaving Washington over the new income tax. She said she thinks the claims are, quote, super overblown. And then she waved her hand and laughed and said, bye. The crowd cheered.
If, the ones that leave, like, bye.
That was the mayor of a city with a 36.5% downtown office vacancy rate, the highest in the entire United States, laughing at the warning signs. That was not a slip, that was a pattern. Remember, this is the same mayor who, the day after winning her election in November 2025, publicly joined a boycott of Starbucks. Not a policy speech, not a vision for the city. A boycott of Seattle's most iconic brand, a company that provides its workers healthcare, paid vacation, and free college tuition. Months later, Howard Schultz announced he was leaving Seattle for a $44 million penthouse in Miami. The same day the millionaire's tax passed in Olympia. Then Starbucks announced it was putting a major new corporate hub in Nashville, Tennessee. $100 million investment, 2,000 jobs. Tennessee has no income tax. The mayor boycotted Seattle's most famous employer. The employer redirected 2,000 jobs to another state. She later acknowledged the boycott had done more harm than good. Now, to be fair, the Blue Star's closure was not caused by one policy, one politician, or one tax increase. Wendy Morales explicitly cited the lease situation as a factor. The building owner provided no viable path to continuation. That matters, but here is what we can say. The lease problem landed on top of years of squeezed margins, stacked costs, and a customer base that is increasingly being priced out of the middle of the Seattle economy. You do not survive a lease negotiation from a position of weakness when your financial cushion has been eroding for years. The hostile economic environment made the decision easier to make, and here is what economists are calling it, the K-shaped economy, a pattern in which consumers sort into high-income and low-income groups, while the middle hollows out. High-end restaurants are doing fine, dollar stores are doing fine. The diner in Wallingford serving $22 omelets to middle-class regulars is dying. In Seattle, that K-shape is not subtle. Luxury yacht charters are booking strong. The middle market restaurants, boutiques, and diners are closing. Let's make this real for a second, because the Blue Star closing is not an abstraction. It is Wendy Morales, who spent her life building on what her father built, locking a door for the last time. These are not hedge fund managers. The people who worked at the Blue Star showed up every morning to do honest work. They built routines. They counted on a paycheck. They had every reason to believe that a 50-year-old neighborhood institution would still be there next month. And the ripple effects do not stop with them. The lunch spots near the Blue Star lose foot traffic. The suppliers who delivered ingredients lose a customer. The nearby businesses that benefited from the neighborhood anchor of a busy, familiar diner see that anchor disappear. Every small business owner in Seattle looks at what happened and quietly does their own math about whether the costs of staying make sense. The damage compounds. The people who can least afford to absorb it end up carrying the most of it. And the Association of Washington Business ran a survey this spring that found something that should alarm every resident of this city. A year ago, 9% of Washington employers said they were considering leaving the state. In the most recent survey, that number is 24%. Nearly a quarter of Washington employers are actively thinking about moving to another state. On the specific metric of cost of doing business, Washington ranks 48th out of 50 states. Seattle went from ranking first in CNBC's top states for business in 2017 to 14th by 2025. Downtown Seattle shed 13,000 jobs in a single year. Oracle laid off nearly 500 Seattle area workers. Meta cut more than 160 Washington employees after earlier rounds. The city faces a $140 million budget gap heading into 2027, and the mayor's stated approach to that gap is to search for what she called, in her words, progressive revenue options. More taxes on whoever has not left yet. This is the doom loop. It is not complicated. Taxes and costs rise. Businesses at the margin close or leave. The tax base the policy was meant to fund starts to shrink. Revenue comes in short of projections. The political response is another round of increases, which pushes more businesses and residents out the door, which grows the gap again. It happened to Illinois. It is happening to California's middle market economy. It happened to the restaurant row in New York neighborhoods that used to anchor working class communities. Same playbook, same stunned reaction every time another closure happens. Same doubling down on the policies driving the departure. So let's bring it all the way back to where we started. A February morning in Wallingford, the smell of coffee and bacon from scratch. The regulars who have been coming here since before Wendy Morales took over from her father. 50 years of omelets and Bloody Marys and trivia nights and neighborhood life concentrated in one room on Stoneway North. And then Wendy Morales turns the key in the lock one last time. Not because the Blue Star failed, not because the food was bad, not because the neighborhood stopped caring, because the math finally stopped working. Because the lease came up at the exact moment when 15 years of stacking costs had taken away every cushion Morales might have used to fight for the space. Because Seattle has built an environment where operating a small, middle-market business, serving a working-class neighborhood, is, in Morales' own word, unsustainable. And the mayor, 14 weeks later, waved goodbye to millionaires and laughed. Here is the bottom line. The Blue Star Cafe did not close because of one bad month or one bad landlord. It closed because the accumulated weight of rising wages, stacking taxes, rising food costs, rising utilities, and a shrinking base of middle-class customers who can actually afford to eat out finally exceeded the willpower of a woman who spent her adult life honoring her father's legacy. That is not a personal failure. That is a policy result. The K-shaped economy is real. And in cities where leadership has decided that the answer to every fiscal problem is to extract more from businesses and residents, the squeeze does not stay abstract. It shows up in empty booths, locked doors, staff who show up one day and find out their shift is their last. 50 years gone in a January social media post. And Seattle's leadership response is to look for more progressive revenue options, while a quarter of the state's employers are openly contemplating whether to stay. The math does not care about intentions. It does not care about what political coalition you are building. It follows the numbers. And right now, the numbers are telling 50-year family-owned diners to close. They are telling a quarter of Washington employers to think about leaving. They are building the highest downtown office vacancy rate in the United States, 2 blocks from City Hall. If that is not a warning, nothing is. I want to hear from you. Are you in Seattle or Washington State, watching this happen from inside? Are you a small business owner who has done the math and is not sure you can stay? Are you a regular somewhere that used to be your anchor spot that is now gone? Drop it in the comments, because these conversations matter and they need to be had. If this video opened your eyes at all, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the stories that actually affect your life. Hit the notification bell so you do not miss what is coming next. Stay informed, stay sharp, and never stop following the money. I'll see you in the next one.